And the topic that we are going to discuss is the atomic bombings of Japan in 1945, which effectively brought the war to an end. Our job as historians is to cut through cultural bias and to seek fact. When I was going through my undergraduate, the professor once told me that historians do not seek truth, they seek fact. The reason why she said this is because truth belongs to religion, it belongs to philosophy, but it doesn't necessarily belong to history. And this was extremely profound to me until I realized that she stole it from the movie Indiana Jones. Our job as historians is to seek the fact. What happened and what lessons can we draw from the event? How are we supposed to do this? Well, first we separate what are facts from what are opinions. And for the purposes of this research, nothing should be held beyond scrutiny. And again, this is very controversial, but we're talking about religious texts, cultural icons, historical figures. No one is held on a pedestal. Everyone is worthy of historical scrutiny, so we could figure out the facts of what actually occurred in that era and what lessons we can draw from those actions. Now, we want to hear out the entire narrative, essentially both sides, to draw a more complete picture of the event, and then we reach our own conclusions. Today we're going to examine the controversial historical event, which is dropping the atomic bombs on Japan. Now, we're going to do this by listing facts, things that are verifiably true that one side or the other would point to justify their opinion of the event. Separating facts away from opinions will gain a more full understanding of this event, which will lead us to better recognizing historical patterns, which ultimately is the goal of the historian, is to record history so that we can recognize good patterns and perpetuate them, but also recognize negative patterns and hopefully find alternate routes so that those patterns do not repeat. So here's a list of facts, straight up facts. Everyone can agree with them. World War II, by casualty numbers, was the most devastating war in human history. 85 million dead when the world population was only about 2 billion people. Another fact, the United States were attacked by Japan on December 7th in 1941. This event was the catalyst for the United States entering the war. And on top of that, it was Germany that declared war on the United States. President Roosevelt requested that Congress declare war upon Japan, and all of a sudden we're now at war with Germany and Italy because they declared war on the United States as well. In May of 1945, Germany was forced to surrender when the USSR, United States, and Great Britain captured Berlin. And you would think that with their major ally out of the fight, Japan might be more willing to end the war, to end the suffering. But again, they refused to quit. So the war continues on through the summer of 1945. In March of 1945, the United States won the Battle of Iwo Jima. 100,000 American soldiers were engaged in an attack on the island, which was defended by 20,000 Japanese soldiers. At the conclusion of this battle, 18,000 Japanese soldiers were confirmed to have been killed as a result of the action, while out of those 100,000 American soldiers, 26,000 were listed as casualties. As the war continues, as the fighting grows closer and closer to mainland Japan, we begin to see battles with absolutely massive casualty figures. I mean, more people are dying in some of these battles than have been killed in entire wars in human history. So again, the war is growing more and more devastating as it continues. July of 1945, the United States detonated the first atomic bomb. The United States did not immediately just drop the bomb on Japan. No, more than that, they didn't just go to the government because they knew that the government could, in theory, not tell the civilians. The United States even dropped leaflets on the cities, saying you should leave because in a couple days this city is going to be destroyed. Later that week, in August of 45, 2 bombs were dropped on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and this effectively, by August 15th, brings the war to a conclusion. These are all facts. So this is information that we can feed into our reasoning when we draw our conclusions about the dropping of the atomic bombs. Feeding back into that information, we know that World War II was the most destructive war in human history. And that at the end of the war, in the city of Nuremberg, the Nazis were put on trial for crimes against humanity. And what's not really known is that we did the same thing in Japan. The Japanese leadership were put on trial for crimes against humanity. Now, what were these crimes? Well, first was attacks on neutral powers. The Axis powers had a habit of never really declaring war. Essentially, they would make a claim, they would march in, fighting would continue, and then some other power would step in and the war would continue to escalate. And it was Japan that was attacking these neutral powers and drawing other powers into the war. Mass killings. The Japanese are responsible for 14 million dead civilians and dead POWs, many of which are in the country of China. We think of the Holocaust with between 8 and 12 million people dead, depending on the source. In China alone, 14 million dead civilians and prisoners of war. The torture of prisoners of wars, again, going back to the Japanese code of Bushido, a person who surrenders is not worthy of honor or dignity or respect, and so are treated absolutely terribly in the prisoners of war camp. And then finally, comfort women, which, not to put it too lightly or too delicately, is essentially state-sanctioned kidnapping and sex slavery of women and girls, some as young as 12, for the purposes of eliminating venereal disease in the Japanese military. Today, certain countries, specifically Korea, continue to bring this up and continue to seek restitution for the actions of the Japanese. So, for the people making the argument that the bombs were a net good, you look at all these facts and you ask, if we could bring all of these terrible things to a conclusion by essentially pushing a button, why wouldn't we do it? Ending this evil as quickly as possible is a net good. Therefore, dropping the bombs should be seen as a net good. So I want you to take a mental note right now, just listening to the facts. And again, these are all verifiable, actual events perpetrated by the Japanese or the Japanese government during World War II. And think to yourself, dropping the bombs, was it good? And make a mental note of what you think. Because we are about to listen to what the other side has to say about these events. Japan will tell you that the United States had an extremely racist policy towards Asians in general, but Japanese in particular, which is why the Japanese government felt that they needed to confront the United States on a global scale. That the Japanese government was not a democracy. They were a totalitarian dictatorship with nominally the emperor at the head, but in reality, it was Hideki Tojo making all the plans, the invasions, the wars, the fighting, the military operations, the comfort women, which we discussed before. These are all planned out by Hideki Tojo without input from the Japanese people. They didn't want to go to war. They didn't want to invade China or Korea or the Philippines or bomb Pearl Harbor, they weren't asked. It wasn't a democracy. It was a totalitarian dictatorship. The next thing that the side against the bombing will tell you is that it was completely unnecessary. Germany had been knocked out of the war in May of 45. With them being knocked out of the war, all the Allied powers, including Britain, France, the United States, and now even the Soviet Union, are converging on Japan. They know that they are going to lose. So they will tell you that dropping the bombs didn't actually end the war. It was just a way for the United States to show off their power for the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. What was life actually like in the cities after the bombs had been dropped? The cities were completely devastated, and there are still areas today where they warn you not to go because of the lingering radiation. You have traumatized and burned citizens. Again, these are not the government officials. These are the people who were held captive by their own totalitarian government, who had no say in the war to begin with, but the bomb was dropped on them. Next, you have people who are poisoned by the radiation. So people who were able to escape the bomb itself, who lingered in the area, ostensibly helping with pickup or helping with search and rescue, they become poisoned by the bomb as well. These are not the perpetrators of these crimes which we discussed in other countries. These are the people who stayed home. These are the people who are just trying to live their life, who are under the control of a totalitarian regime. And lastly, we have long-term genetic abnormalities in the people of Japan as a result of these bombs being dropped. Now, for many of you, you will agree that the most innocent people are the people who were not born while these atrocities were taking place. These people, these children, were not involved, and yet they are suffering the repercussions of the bombs being dropped. So long-term genetic abnormalities, not only on the innocent civilians, but the innocent civilians of multiple generations after the fact are suffering as a result of these bombs. The bombings traumatized the people of Japan, not the criminals who were perpetrating these acts, the common people, including the ones who were not fighting the war. The people were poisoned by radiation, which no one knew about. The United States probably should have done more research into what long-lasting effects of these bombs were going to be before dropping the bombs. And even today, nearly 80 years after the war, the Japanese people are still suffering from the effects of these attacks. So with these alternate facts being presented, what is your opinion on the dropping of the atomic bombs? Was it right? Was it wrong? Did it perhaps move your initial instinct? Or are you in the column that you do not know? Because ultimately our job as historians is to become familiar with all the facts so that we can reach the most accurate conclusion. Thank you.